Hey everyone, it appears that winter has arrived here in Ames, Oklahoma, and we are on Psalm 55. So if you go ahead and turn there, we're going to dive in. Now, when we read this psalm, you're going to you're going to see a similar psalm to what we've had the last few, especially here in the 50s of the Psalms. There's a lot of David dealing with betrayal. And it feels like as you read that the circle kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as that betrayal gets closer and closer to home. Now, we don't know exactly where this story comes from. We don't know the story behind this psalm. We know that just from reading it that David was betrayed, but we don't know by who. We don't know if it's by his son or by somebody else close to him. While Saul was trying to overthrow him, or if it was, like it was with his son after the fact when David became king, and his son was a part of a rebellion against him. We don't know where this particular psalm comes from. Okay, now something else we're going to see. Most of the psalms that we read, there's a pretty general flow to how it goes, right? There's a structure there that the psalmist has built that psalm upon that actually adds value and understanding and things like that to the psalm itself. The structure usually helps to do that. We talked about this past week with Psalm 23, where there's third person at the beginning, third person at the end, but in the middle, David talks and he addresses God directly. Gives us this sense of intimacy. That's the way the poem is laid out, and it helps to draw us into that sense of intimacy, right? And typically we can pick out stanzas, or maybe it's it starts with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet or whatever. We don't get any of that with this psalm, okay? And the way it makes me feel about it is David feels desperation. He feels angst. He feels aggression. He feels anxiety. He's incredibly troubled in these moments, and it plays itself out in the way that he produces and writes down this psalm. And I think if we think back to the times when maybe we've been in that anxiety or in that depression or in that struggle or hurt in that way, and really what we're going to see here from David is paranoia. When we find ourselves in that paranoia, our thought process feels very much like this psalm. I think there's something to that where it feels scattershot. Like one thing it's this, and the next it's this, and then we're all over the place, right? We've all felt that way before, where our thoughts, our emotions are just all over the place. And we're going to get that in this psalm. So let's go ahead. We're going to read through it. We're going to talk about it just a little bit as we go through. It's a longer psalm, so we're going to break it down a little bit as we go, okay? So, to the choir master with stringed instruments, a maskil of David. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Attend to me and answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan because of the noise of the enemy. So, 1 and 2 there. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea of mercy. Attend to me and answer me. That's just a prayer, right? David goes to prayer first, and that's where we should all go first, is prayer, right? Our first response to any issue should not be to try to make it through it on our own, should be to try to struggle through it or go ask help from somebody else. Our first response to everything really should be prayer, but a lot of times we use it as our last response, right? Which that's not the way it's supposed to be. Now, what we're going to get here now is right after this prayer, you're going to start to feel that paranoia start to come to the front for David. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan because of the noise of my enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they drop trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. Now, there's some words that we don't see a whole lot in Scripture in the middle of this psalm, and they really go to show the mental state of where David was in this. Words, I am restless. I moan because of the noise of my enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they drop trouble upon me, right? My heart is in anguish. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. Now, those are some pretty intense words, and in the Hebrew, they're even beyond what the English talks about. But it gives us this sense that David feels like wave after wave after wave is just crashing down upon him, and it's not coincidental in his mind. It's not happenstance. It's not one person doing one thing and another doing another, and they just happen to overlap. No, this is pure and simple paranoia in the life of David at this point, where everything has been put together to rise and to come against him in these moments. And we feel that in this psalm. We feel how he feels. And I'm sure there are times in your life and my life where we felt that way, that everything is conspiring against us to hold us down, right? Now, 6 through 8 here, we're going to see a temptation to flee. David wants to get out of here. He wants to get out of the situation. He wants to go off into the wilderness. And this is what he says. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness, Selah. I would hurry to find a shelter from the raging wind and tempest. Now, that seems like a reasonable request, right? Just get me out of this situation. But unfortunately, in life, that's not how it works, right? Typically, when we have these issues, when we're struggling with anxiety, or we're struggling with the situations that are going on in our life, the answer is not to run away from it, right? Because that just puts it off. That just relegates it to later on. We don't ever actually deal with it, right? So this plays out in a lot of different ways in today's world. Some people turn to alcohol, and they build up all week. They don't deal with stuff. They build things up all week. They put it off, they put it off, they put it off, they put it off. And then instead of dealing with it, they turn to alcohol or to some other drug or an addiction to deal with that, right? Some people eat a bowl of chocolate ice cream and watch Netflix all night. They get home from work, and instead of engaging in the house and engaging with the family, it's straight to their room to watch Netflix and to binge, right? And that can be dangerous because we begin to withdraw from family and from loved ones. We begin to withdraw from those that God has placed around us to help us through. But ultimately, we begin to withdraw from God because we pour our emotion and our anxiety out on something other than our God. Maybe it's work. Maybe you have troubles at home. You have struggles with your family. You've got sickness or something that you're dealing with. And instead of dealing with it, you go and you just work extra hours and extra hours and extra hours, and you pour yourself into that. Maybe it's online shopping, whatever it is. We all have things that we turn to in moments of paranoia and anxiety that aren't healthy, that aren't who we're supposed to turn to, which is God, right? And so we turn away from him and we turn towards these other things that on their own, they're not bad. There's nothing wrong with watching Netflix. There's nothing wrong with working extra. There's nothing wrong with shopping. There's nothing wrong with having a drink every now and then. But when we turn to that, to deal with our anxieties, to deal with our betrayals, to deal with our paranoia, well, then it becomes an issue. It becomes something that we have to try to overcome. So I'm going to go and keep reading here. I know I don't want it to get too long. So I'm going to read through, and then we'll finish up with what he says here. Verse 9, destroy, O Lord, divide their tongues, for I see violence and strife in the city. And as we're reading this, I want you to think not just city, because for David, city meant seat of government or places of power, right? That's what city means here. It's not simply one place where he's at. It's the seat of power for him. Day and night they go around it on its walls, and iniquity and trouble are within it. Ruin is in its midst. Oppression and fraud do not depart from its marketplace. For it is not an enemy who taunts me, that I could bear it. It is not an adversary who deals insolent with me, that I could hide from it. But it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. We used to take sweet counsel together. Within God's house we walked in the throng. Let death steal over them. Let them go down to Sheol alive. For evil is in their dwelling place and in their hearts. But I called to God, and the Lord will save me. Evening and morning and at noon, I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. He redeems my soul in safety from the battle that I wage, for many are arrayed against me. God will give ear and humble them. He who is enthroned from of old, Selah, because they do not change and do not fear God. My companion stretched out his hand against his friends. He violated his covenant. His speech was smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved, but you, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in you. And so again, there's a lot in this. There's no less than 9 or 10 changes of subject and changes of what he's talking about here. And if you've ever felt the way he feels in this psalm, if you've ever felt that an anxiety, then you know exactly what that is about. You know exactly what that feels like. You know that how when you're dealing with those emotions, it can swing from one moment to the next. Your emotions and your focus and your mind and your heart and your soul, it swings back and forth. And we get a response. His first response is to pray, and then it's immediately followed by this paranoia that he feels like life is crashing down on top of him, and he just wants to run. He just wants to get out of there. He doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And then he's praying for destruction of his enemies, and he's dealing with this horror of this betrayal, and then he's praying again for destruction. But then he's praying for persistence and for hope for himself, and then he finishes up with one more slam at his enemies, the worst kind of enemy, the one that's close to us, the one that's in our own home, the one that's in our own family, the one that works next door to us, or the one that we trusted with something valuable in our own life, in our own heart, and they used it against us. That type of betrayal is what David is talking about here, the worst kind of enemy, the one who you thought was your friend, and you find out isn't. And then his last response, thankfully, just like it should be for us, our first response and our last response. After we deal with everything and we go through the emotions, his last response is to pray, is to give it to God. Because he knows and understands that his God is worth trusting. Verse 23, I'll read it one more time. Because some of us are dealing with things today. Maybe not people, but situations. Maybe not situations, but people. We're all dealing with something. And whatever it is, Psalm 55, verse 23, can give us some hope. But you, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days, but what? I will trust in